hard to put smells into words, and I felt that poets are probably the best inspiration possible for this. And your work in particular, I love. But so on that note, I thought that maybe the way that we would start actually is by smelling some things, just because it is sort of like hard to put things into words. So I have some sort of ancient recipes here to smell. I thought we'd do sort of like a timeline through. My plan was to start originally with like the very first perfume, what's credited as being the first perfume. It's from the 14th century. Was originally devised as a plague remedy to help prevent you from getting the plague. So it's called Queen of Hungary water. However, the one that I ordered, now it has this very sort of, it's like a stringent, sort of bracing smell to it. And the one that I ordered is actually like a sort of skin toner. And it has a very low concentration, and it didn't show up on the water paper very well. So feel free to come up and sort of mist yourself with it later. But I'm not going to send it around on the water paper. Instead, I'm going to skip directly to something which actually has a very, very sort of similar scent profile, although it's also not usually thought of as perfume. And that is, it's called, in French, it's Elixir vegetal, which is sort of botanical elixir. It's made by the Carthusian monks. Here's a little bottle of Elixir vegetal, which unfortunately I could not replace because it is, there's like a worldwide shortage, because it's still like a complete secret. It's made by these same monks who've been making it from the 16th century. There are only 3 monks that know the recipe, and they decided to pull back on production so that they could spend more time praying. So now it's like impossible to get, like all of these like New York bars are like freaking out that they can't get like the genuine like botanical elixir. But I do have a bottle laying around. Chartreuse is essentially what it is. So you still buy it in the liquor store. So we're going to give you a couple of options here. You can either get it on sort of a perfume or blotting paper and smell it, or if we really want to be, pretend that we are sort of 18th century royalty, we can put a few drops on a sugar cube, and then you can put it in your mouth, and that really sort of opens up the flavors a little bit more. Let me get a dropper. All right, assistants, start coming here. What I want you to do, fill this up, and then drop about like 5 or 6 drops on yourself. You guys can do that. While they're doing that, I will say, so people often think that drinking perfume is like a weird thing to do. It is not. That's exactly what they did. The reason we don't do it now is because it's made with methyl alcohol, but they only started doing that in 1870 for tax purposes. It's called denaturation. They wanted to deliberately make it poison so that they could tax it at a different rate. But it used to be sort of the exact same kind of alcohol that people would drink. And in fact, taking it internally was one of the really common ways to take it. All right, so one of you pass those around. The other person, stick it in like that. And then head out and kiss it out.
Any instructions for this? Under the tongue, all the time?
I would like on top of the tongue, sort of like let it dissolve and then crumble and like, let it sort of fill. So it's sort of like these perfume, like chartreuse wasn't necessarily something that you would sort of splash behind your ears at the time. But things like the Queen of Hungary water, it was both. This was something that you could like sort of drink or take internally, and also would like wear in a little vial around your neck, and you sort of smell it if you thought you were getting vapors, or you put some on your wrists, or you could use it to clean your hands. I mean, it really was sort of a general, like sort of panacea for whatever ails you. All right, so got more to go. very good. We'll let these people work. I'll start. I'll say a few words about sort of the next up in ours. We're going to sort of move forward a century or so. So what would happen? So these were general, so as I said, sort of like elixirs that were often taken medicinally, taken to promote health. So pharmacists would often have like their own sort of proprietary recipe of what they call the sort of something called aqua mirabilis or miracle waters. So one particular miracle water in the city-state of Cologne like leapt up in popularity and became everybody's favorite, and got particularly popular in France, and began going by the French name eau de Cologne. And this one is a little bit, so one of the things you might notice with chartreuse is that it's very sort of herbally. It's not, it's not what we think of as a sort of sweetness of a perfume. And with eau de Cologne, what we're getting is something that is much sort of lighter and more citrusy. All right, so then I want you to sort of switch over, start doing these. So I'll stick
Thank you.
All right, there. So your job now is to here. So this is kind of taking a while. Why don't we go on up and have a seat, and they'll be like sort of passing out a little bit as we go.
Well, I'm so glad to be chatting with you, Theresa, and I promised Theresa back when she asked me to do this event back in January, February. It may seem so long ago, and I remember thinking, oh, that's going to be a glorious week, it's going to be finals, and usually there's almost no rain, and then boom, we have this, but
We're inside.
yeah, we're inside, and this is a good time, and I promised Theresa I wouldn't do any of those kind of boring questions, so I'm going to hold to that, Theresa. I think maybe if you can start us off, I also realized just with so many events, what I love so much is when the author puts into words, kind of not necessarily the elevator pitch, but maybe the why. If you think about back when you made the proposal for this book, can you talk about the why and maybe a little bit of the what? We mostly know what it is, but I also like hearing from the author.
Yeah, this was hard to condense down into an elevator pitch. It was really hard, like trying to sell this book with a single sentence. But let me tell you, like where, how I came to it. And I think so. I've been interested for a very, very long time. So the sort of through thread with some of my other books is that I was interested in what you call like the philosophical problem of materialism. That is the idea that there's no such thing as like a soul or a spirit. Like all there is in the world is matter, and it follows physical laws. And sort of we as living creatures are not sort of fundamentally different from inert things like rocks. We're made of the same matter, having following the same laws. And so there's an assumption, like during the 19th century, that sort of old ideas about the soul and the spirit are now like thrown by the wayside, and like everybody's switching over to materialism. And I was just convinced that this wasn't true, and so I found some of the the voices that were the voices of dissent, I guess. And so I just started like pulling that thread through, and it turned out that perfume was at the center of it. That they sort of this idea of like sort of scent and vitality and sort of like living force, and that's particularly evident in these perfume ingredients was what got me here.
Interesting. And I just going off on that you maybe touched a little bit on it in your intro already, but can you talk about like what it is about smell? Because one thing I wanted to share is that Theresa and I used to be neighbors, actually. The first house my family and I owned here in Oxford, I was just so happy to see that the kitty corner. Theresa was down the street, and I remember we'd walk our kids to the school bus. We have the same ages. I have guys, she has gals. To the school bus stop, and then every once in a while, Theresa, you'd ask me like something about smell, a question, and I always was thinking like, let me get my coffee first, you know. But so I know that your curiosity about smell has been brewing for a time, and this is all pre-pandemic. But can you bring us in about like what is it about smell? Out of all the senses, did you find the most intriguing or you had most curiosity about? Because you never asked me about sight or sound or anything. It was always about smell, and I was like, Theresa, I need my coffee.
Well, it hits are particularly fascinating to me just because it's like such a fundamental part of a person's experience of a particular moment, but it's so difficult, again, like to put into words. And so in some ways to like get it on the historical record and to sort of like capture it in any kind of description of it. And yet, you know, sort of as we're living in the world, you know, sort of smell is such a vital component that just often like disappears from you know, how we talk about it.
Absolutely, and there's no way you would know this, or maybe you do, because you're I always think of as Theresa as my genius colleague, but you know, in the poetry world, I always am telling my students to use smell, and that's the number one out of all the 5 senses that they kind of forget in their writing. Why do you think that is? Like, just
because it's so hard. It's so hard. It's like, you know, the thing about smell is that you know, especially like in perfume, there's like, I think about like 5 different categories of perfumes. There's, you know, the florals and the woods and the you know, but like you have 5 categories, and yet our nose is able to distinguish. They don't even have an upper limit. Like perhaps an infinite. Perhaps a billion different kinds of smell. And so the idea that, you know, we have like 5 words to describe, you know, hundreds of millions of smells. I mean, it's just, you know, you need some sort of leap of imagination, which again is why I love the poets. Again, like I love the way that you use smell in your work. I just thinking the description of the corpse flower as, you know, sort of like the rotting, dirty diapers covered in like blue cheese dressing. I'm probably getting it wrong, but like that's what I remember.
It's dinner hour.
Right. Yes.
But it's true, yeah. And you know, I wanted to pivot just a little bit because so much of this book, and you all need to make sure you get this before you walk out of here. So much of this book, you know, when you first told me the book, I was like, okay, interesting, because I know I'm a big nerd, and that's exactly the kind of, this is absolutely, I mean, I curled up with this by the fire, and I was reading this, and I was kind of ignoring my children. It was just so fascinating.
They're the teenagers now. They don't mind.
They can find snacks. But how, I wanted to pivot just a little bit, like, how do you go about, and I don't want you to be humble because I want you to own it because you are one of my genius colleagues. I know you're going to say no, but how do you take that natural curiosity that you have, that I have, maybe the average person on the square maybe doesn't have about smells or perfumes or things like that. What is that process like when you are taking a subject that you love and you think about a lot? How do you translate that to the general public? Can you talk about that either from a craft level or philosophical level or anything like that? Just, I'm always fascinated about how writers in general, but in particular, Theresa, how you take something that you're obsessed with and then make it almost contagious. Now, I actually pulled the book from Scribus the other day, and it was about perfumes too. And prior to this project, I don't think I had read anything on perfume. So you made it contagious for me to want to learn about it. How did you do that?
You know, I mean, this was interesting because this book was in some sense a bit of a departure. I know that Lynn introduced me to the idea that I had an undergraduate degree in physics, but I was sort of like entering the domain of chemistry here, which I've never quite felt as comfortable in. And I think we had a conversation where you said you took organic chemistry. As I did.
That was the reading out class. That's when I decided I was going to be a poet.
Well, and I decided I had to take organic chemistry for this. But like as I was sitting there, I really sort of solidified my realization that I didn't want to study organic chemistry. But at the same time, I think what it is that I was convinced that they, there were just such interesting questions there. I mean, this question again, the fundamental question of how we can be composed of matter and, how that works. I mean, I found, that's a really interesting question, and, they were the people that were delving into it, and so I was going to try to, again, extract from them, what I want to know, while at the same time, not, if anybody's worried that I've said the phrase organic chemistry, this is essentially a book written for people that have zero interest in taking an organic chemistry class. But again, what I wanted to try to do was get into the deep questions that they were asking, and then try to sort of make them relevant to the kinds of things we all think about sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, just to counter that just a little bit. I mean, I was a chemistry major. It was fascinating. The way you wrote about chemistry was truly fascinating. So I don't want to diss chemists here and or chemistry in general, but it was so fascinating. And I just you take these really difficult subjects, but you distill them, not to unintended, I guess, into digestible, just utterly fascinating works. And I want to just one of the things that was also so fascinating about this book is that throughout I was going through and I was dog-earing on my art. There's so many interesting old-fashioned illustrations. And can you talk about just the play of image and text? Like, how did you know when you needed to fight for this illustration, or you had to absolutely include it? The one I'm showing up, I know not everybody can see, but it's I'll just read it. Joseph, and forgive my French, Joseph Louis Gay-Lussac and Jean-Baptiste Biot in their 1804 balloon ascent. They rose 4,000 meters to conduct the first scientific experiments at these altitudes. So they're in a hot air balloon. And again, it just, one of the beautiful things about this book is it just made me feel like I was traveling in location, traveling in time, without ever leaving my chair. So can you talk a little bit about the illustration choices in here?
Yeah, they were mostly just pictures that I fell in love with, pictures that I saw it and I'm like, that's really cool. And so the few of them I think directly illustrate some point that I'm trying to make, but many of them were just ones that I sort of saw, as I was reading these sort of 19th century journals, and I thought that it evoked the moment so well that I wanted to have it. So while we're speaking, you mentioned teenagers. Has everybody in the back gotten the eau de cologne? Is that a yes? All right. Maybe I'll get my assistants back up and we'll go on to sort of a third, if you don't mind. Waiting for one moment. All right. Have they left the building? Oh, here we are. All right. So let's do this. This is one. It's called Eau de Logier, which is, for those of you that have sort of started on the book, you know that this is essentially the perfume house that I'm following, which by the 1830s is like the oldest perfume house in Paris. And so I made this, I had a bunch of their recipes, and I made this myself. I didn't quite make it like them. They had like a really complicated process of distilling things over and over again, and I was just able to get some essential oils and drop them in. But nonetheless, I tried to sort of recreate the recipe. So we'll go ahead and smell it. You guys may have to rip off a few more of these, but I'll get you. And what you might notice is that we're getting into something which is sort of substantially sort of sweeter, whereas the eau de cologne have this really sort of very citrusy, sort of bright, freshness to it. This one has a lot of, I wrote on here, elm, bergamot, sweet marjoram, rosewood, and geranium are its central notes, and we're getting into an era of sort of more sort of sweet floral perfumes in this. All right, I'll hand the floor over to them.
Theresa, can you talk I have so many questions here, and I'm just nerding out here with them. I'm trying to pick like one of my favorite. You know, can you talk a little bit about? Selfishly, I want to know about the Crystal Palace. Can you talk a little bit about it? I tangentially heard about it, but I want to know from you. If you could tell the audience what is this? The moment in here, without I think giving too much away. But can you talk about how that was a kind of a plot point in this?
Sure. So I'm going to say a few words about the Crystal Palace itself, and then I'll talk about like how it ties back into perfume. So it was this exhibition in 1851 where Great Britain was determined to show that it was the sort of premier industrial nation. France had been doing actually these exhibitions itself since Napoleon. They did several of them. And Britain was like, we are better manufacturers than France. Let's completely outshow them. And so one of the things they did, the reason it's called the Crystal Palace is because there are sort of thousands and thousands of this plate glass. And you can sort of see it's an echo in some ways of, sort of Versailles in the 17th century was known for, sort of like this hall of mirrors, where, each of these mirrors was like this stupendous achievement in technology. And then what had happened in Britain is they had just found a way of being able to roll these flat pieces of glass industrially, with machines doing it. And so all of a sudden, they could make, sort of thousands more plates of glass than in Versailles. So, so the idea of the Crystal Palace is that they were sort of outdoing this sort of French magnificence. And this is also the moment that we see in the book where you begin to see that the first synthetic scents are on display. The first, there you have both sort of perfumes. There's this artificial almond that everybody's excited about. Also some sort of artificial flavors. There's one that they claim is sort of evocative of pineapple, but completely made synthetically. That is actually starting with coal products. Essentially the stuff that you would throw away after the process of making coal gas. They can take this and sort of turn it now into what had previously been a very expensive natural product.
Interesting. And can you talk a little bit about how the synthetic scents were accepted? Was it considered a status thing to have something synthetic, or was it considered, oh, you don't actually smell like an actual rose, you smell like a fake rose? What was the cultural feeling about that?
Well, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of excitement because, this could be sort of much cheaper. Like instead of, especially an artificial bitter almond scent was the very first one. So previously, this had been, there was this almond paste that had been used, like Marie Antoinette used to put it on her skin, and it was enormously expensive. And now that they were making a sort of artificial sort of almond scent, sort of everybody started using, this almond soap. Everybody could be like Marie Antoinette. It turned out it actually was very toxic, so it didn't turn out very well. But also to tie this back a little bit, also into this question of, sort of, is there anything special about living things, or is there anything different about, the compounds growing in nature and the ones that chemists were making in their labs? Well, the appearance of synthetic chemicals made sort of chemists in particular like very optimistic about the fact that there is no difference. We can make anything on our own in labs starting from coal. And then again, like the guys that I'm following through in my book start to raise questions that in fact there are sort of subtle but persistent differences that they can't make go away.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more? I have a two-part question. Can you talk a little bit more about the pair of fellows that you were following through here? Because that's where I feel like this is going to be a Netflix drama or something, and I watch it for sure. They have so much personality, and these are perfumers with all kinds of drama and backbiting and things like that. It's actually funny. I found myself chuckling a lot, and that's not something when you first told me the book that you didn't tell me it was going to be a comedy of some sort. But can you talk about this pair and just maybe if you see any, I don't know, ties back to the present day with the way these two are kind of competing but also helping each other get better? I mean, I don't know, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So one of them I had known before, Auguste Laurent. He's sort of like known within the history of chemistry as having like an utterly tragic life. I mean, he had all of these ideas that he was like literally laughed at on the floor of the Academy of Sciences. Like one of his papers was read, and like everybody burst into laughter after it was completed. And it turns out, he's sort of right about a lot of stuff, but was just completely not acknowledged in his lifetime. And then the other one is sort of somebody that he's working with who was just, it was a total investigative project, even like figuring out the details of his biography. I mean, he really hadn't made it into the historical record, but he's the one that had invited Laurent to work in. Edouard Lagier, who was part of the family of the perfumers, and he invites Laurent to work with him in the perfume shop, and that's where they're. And he's the one too who is sort of particularly skilled at this process of distillation and making a lot of these compounds.
Mm-hmm. And do you see any parallels like today? Is there like a famous kind of working pair, or just even anything about the relationship that you see kind of in 2023?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not coming up with any names. But
who would we can do, I love playing like casting decisions.
Oh, yes.
I call him Eddie, but Edouard. Who would you imagine as a perfect Edouard?
Yeah, well, so these guys are like these perfect, like, romantic bohemians. I mean, they're in their 20s and like the 1830s, and so, they're wearing like these flowing, like, romantic, cravats and such. So it's like a, Timothy Chalamet type vibe.
Can you talk about something you said earlier was actually kind of dovetailing to one of my questions that I had for you, and it is about writing a book that doesn't have simple answers. And without giving anything away, I will say, or I won't give anything away about the book, but I will say, like, oftentimes when I'm talking with a writer, a nonfiction writer, they're trying to get to the bottom of something, and they won't stop writing the book. It turns out really, really long until they get a definitive answer.
Yeah.
Semi-spoiler alert, it ends kind of with a question in some ways. Can you talk about that? Because there's a lot of times, and I adore that. I actually love that. I do that myself. So it's a little selfish of a question, but can you talk? I feel like that was a purposeful choice. I mean, because you really kept going to double the size until you found
nobody knows. Yeah. I mean, so again,
but I'm
spoiled, but
you could have done it.
I think that sort of biochemists are still they're hard at work, sort of as we speak. I mean, this is considered one of the sort of great enduring scientific mysteries, sort of still left to be discovered. So. It's funny, actually, this morning I got an email from a biochemist who'd read my book, and it was like pointing me in the direction of some research, and I was like, this can be your next book. So, they're like, maybe by the time the next book comes out, we'll have figured it out. But one of the reasons that sort of ended where we did is because, again, like, this is. I think a lot of people have the sense that there aren't that many things that scientists don't know these days, but there are, and this question of, why are living things different from artificial ones is I think something that doesn't sort of pierce the radar of most people, but is still, it's very much a question.
This book, folks, it's like one of those things, it's just having like a BFF who just happens to be brilliant, leading you through Europe in these capers and questions, and it's just such a good read. I want to make sure that we have time for questions and things like that, but I can't stress this enough. I already said twice I'm a nerd, so don't take it, I'm trying to take that hat off. It really is a book that is just fascinating. It's a good page turner, Summer's about to be here, and it is truly, one of the things that I love so much about this book is that you're not afraid to show what you don't know, and you're also afraid to kind of flex and stretch out a little bit and say, I kind of know a lot about what I'm talking about. But again, it never feels like you're being, I never felt like I was being talked down to or anything like that. It just was, I just was so happy to be led by the hand in this. And I guess the last question, but it talks about the beginning of the book, and then we'll leave it for questions. Is, can you talk about the prologue? And just as a reader, I think it's actually one of the most fascinating and interesting. It sets the ground up for so much. But I know I will tell you, and maybe I shouldn't say this because I'm an English professor, oftentimes I kind of skip the prologue, especially if it's a book that I really love, only because I want to get into it, and then maybe I'll go back to the prologue later. This is one I'm glad I did not skip because it really kind of sets you up. Can you talk about, I mean, just the writing of the prologue? Why did you include it? Why did you not just say, like, hey, let the reader just jump right in and figure this out?
Well, that goes back to the question of, sort of how did I sell this book? And I started, I sort of started like back in, 1770 originally. And it wasn't until I was, sort of sending out sample chapters that I kind of thought, like, well, I have to give more of a sense of like what the actual action is. So yeah, in a way, like in my mind, it's kind of like, like the stereotypical like 80s movies where they like show like a kid like running through the school hallways, and then it's like the record scratch, and it's like, how did I get here? So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, should we give up time for questions?
Sure.
Yeah. And yeah, you don't want to miss the entire book, but you definitely don't want to skip the prologue. It just sets you up. It's just like a brilliant friend leading you through this wild caper in Europe, and it's utterly fascinating. I'm sure you all still have a little taste of chartreuse on your tongue. So even if you've had a little too much chartreuse or not enough, let's open it up for questions. Yeah. Let's open it up for questions for Theresa.
Did this change how you sort of think about smell in your daily life, thinking about it so much in this sort of academic, historical way? I'm just wondering if it's changed your own sort of senses or what you notice, or if you like breathe more deeply around a stinky thing to really try and put language to it.
Yeah, it definitely, yes. I mean, there are times when I'm smelling things now which I will think like, how would I describe this? Which again is it's hard to do, and you have to sort of rely in some ways, again, the poetry comes into it. You have to somehow, evoke a feeling, or like, evoke a sort of internal state that the other person will feel, and that's the only way to do it. So yes, the answer is yeah. Like sometimes this question of like how would I describe this smell becomes a sort of really deep question about like what's going on in me as I'm smelling it.
Yeah, I have a curiosity question, and that is, some people are just allergic to some smells. Yes. Can you talk about that and why maybe some people get a headache or have some sort of reaction? I always wondered.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Again, it's like one of the, it's one of these sort of like difficult problems that scientists are still studying. But I'll add a little bit of history to this, which is that, again, going back to the court of Versailles. So Louis XIV was absolutely insane for smell. He had essentially like perfume fountains. He had steam diffusers in every room. Every single courtier that approached him was like bathed in all sorts of different kinds of scent. I mean, he really was sort of like obsessed with everything smelling good all the time. And then late in life, he became utterly intolerant of virtually all smell, except for one single smell of the orange blossoms that he grew in his own yard. But yes, he went from like just absolutely immersing himself constantly in them to not being able to be in the same room with them.
Yeah, in the back.
I have a dog that will drag me like 3 blocks to get pizza on the pavement.
Yes.
And so that's really attuned to the way that animals experience smell differently than humans do. Is that part of how these people are thinking about smell and the world as a whole, and sort of thinking about that as humans?
Yes, the smell is like what connects us to the animal world in some sense. So yeah, there's a, like one of the reasons that you don't see smell a lot in the historical record is because it's hard to talk about. But another reason is that particularly what you see happening like during the Enlightenment is that it starts to be sort of degraded in its importance of how important it is to the human experience. That is that sort of smelling is something that animals do. You know, the less we do it, probably the better and more enlightened we are.
I have a question. Can you say something about hygiene? Because in the 18th century, apparently, and before, hygiene was associated with all the perfumes and the smells, and how and when does that change?
Well, there's sort of a through thread here that it's always the case that bad smells are associated with poor health and that good smells are associated with good health. So, you know, as I'm sure you know, like nobody took baths in like up until like pretty late in the 18th century. It was considered bad for you to take baths until the 19th century. So it's better to sort of dump on a bunch of perfume. So they start bathing, I guess, in the 19th century as part of the answer to that question. But it's actually not quite the discrete sort of change that you think, because it was still the case that it was actually considered the fact that so within this sort of alchemical tradition, there's something called the spiritus rector, which is equated with scent, and that was thought to be what was responsible for giving living things their organization. So as a plant grew and became organized, it was the spiritus rector guiding that. So the thought was that's what people were trying to sort of bottle in the, in these perfumes, and that was sort of responsible for this vital power that they were trying to incorporate. So in a way, it was always about health, but I think sort of why did Louis XIV in Versailles spend like so much effort on trying to get all these perfumes? Part of it, I think, I call it like a sort of hoarding of the essence of life itself, and he was trying to extract the vitality from the plants and transfer it onto himself.
I have a question about the evolution of smell. I mean, in Roman times, you go to a museum, you see all of those little bottles and that had essential oils and things like that. Do we still like the same kind of oils and smells, or was it a different smell then?
Yeah, I mean there are sort of vogues and fashions of different smells, but a lot of the ones with the ancient Egyptians, sort of like roses, like we still love the smell of a rose, for example. A lot of them are the same. I mean it's interesting because the people think of distillation as associated with alcohol, but it actually, like the distillation of alcohol didn't really pick up until sort of the Middle Ages in Europe. But the sort of distillation of these essential oils, it was like happening from the time of ancient Egypt, and was some of the first efforts to sort of extract, sort of isolate compounds from plants. Way in the back.
This may be related to some of the things you were just talking about, but I've always been curious about the idea of the basis of so many perfumes being really disgusting.
Yes.
How did that? It's like eating oyster. Like, who was the first idiot who ate oyster?
Well, the trick is what you may have noticed, actually, with some of the stuff that I was handing out, is that they weren't particularly long-lasting perfumes, especially the one that I made myself. Probably, it's probably even gone off of your blotter strip by now. So it didn't have a lot of staying power. So a lot of like the really nasty stuff like, sort of like, squeezing the anal glands, or, like getting like the civet, which is essentially, you can think of like, your cat spraying on a wall and then you're never able to wash it off. Like that's essentially what the civet that they're using for food ingredients. And the reason that these are really popular is because they can make a smell stick around for a very, very long time. So often you're sort of blending them together with some of the more sort of preferable smells, because a lot of the things are what's precious about them actually is their volatility and their ephemeral nature. I mean, they're disappearing so quickly, which again is sort of like why there was so much effort to sort of capture them. But yes, it's sort of a balance between sort of trying to get this the most sort of volatile, ephemeral part of a plant, and yet kind of like fix it for yourself.
Well, Theresa, at the risk of revealing I've only read 2 pages of her book, I think this question is going to expose me. But how would you briefly respond to the question of to what extent is the story that you tell a French story, and to what extent is it a global story? If you think about the kind of worldwide development not only of chemistry but also the perfume industry.
Yeah, well, certainly sort of key to, these perfumes would sort of not exist if, the French East India Company hadn't like brought back a bunch of stuff from around the world, and then they began planting it in, the hillsides of southern France, and and grow a lot of things there. But yeah, so the sort of native plants that you have some like lavender and stuff, but like a lot of the real favorites, sort of like jasmine, tuberose, some of the big heavy hitters are things that were brought from the colonial empire back.
Just such good questions. Maybe one more? This is your chance, folks, to ask any question you have about smell.
First, I'll just make a comment that you were talking about how difficult it is for to put words on different smells, but that's essentially what wine people are always trying to do, and make fun of. Everybody makes fun of because you end up saying things that are really ridiculous sometimes because you're going, it smells like,
you have to. Yeah, like you essentially, again, you have to sort of evoke a feeling. I'm going to read a couple lines from a poem that I really liked called Small Murders, if I may. So when Cleopatra...
We didn't script this at all.
We did not. I'm embarrassing Amy, but I liked it. So when Cleopatra received Antony on her cedarwood ship, she made sure he would smell her in advance across the sea. Perfumed sails, nets sagging with rose hips and crocus, draped over her bed, her feet and hands rubbed in almond oil, cinnamon, and henna. I know I had you when you told me you could not live without my scent. I'll stop there. It goes on. You can read it on your own. But today, I love this idea that that the perfume, it's about almost a sort of like active possession. It's trying to just grab onto the essence of something.
Well, that's actually true, and actually that's probably why, one of the many reasons why Theresa and I are friends. That's actually researched, triple fact checked as well. All the science and natural history in my books are true. Cleopatra did just rub herself in like 5 different layers of scents anytime she knew Mark Antony was coming anywhere nearby. Even like the minute he got on the ship, and people told her in advance, or they wrote in advance, oh, Mark Antony's visiting, she would start all the perfumes. It was sometimes like a week-long layering of stuff. So anyway. And
then you go into Napoleon, who also was absolutely obsessed with scent. So he was a big fan of the eau de cologne that you smelled. He would go through about 2 bottles of it a day. He would pour bottles in his head. He would have a servant sort of do what he called like frictions, where they would like rub it into his body. Again, like he drank it. He poured it in his bath. Put a little bit in his wine or water. It was rumored he kept like a flask in his boot during battles, and then if he needed to think really clearly, he'd take a sniff. But again, like it's what they're convinced that it's essentially a bottle of vitality, and so he's getting a little life essence there.
Oh my goodness, this has been so fascinating. I want to end with you. And if you could tell us, just, and then we'll end up, and then I want to see a giant line here for buying Theresa's book. It's just it's such a great gift for yourself, for other people. It's just, you will learn something just new. It's really truly fascinating. But Theresa, can you tell us? Can you end us here with what was your favorite discovery out of all? Because I can imagine every page I was marking like, where did you get this? Where did you get this? What was your biggest surprise in doing all the research here for this? Because this was most of it was done during the pandemic, I think, right?
Well, no, I've been working on this for a while.
So maybe take the pandemic kind of out of it, but just maybe what is your most delightful kind of surprise? You know, Robert Frost, from the poet's point of view, always says no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, and I was surprised all throughout his book. So I want to hear from you. What was your favorite?
Well, this isn't, I don't know, it's not so much like a thing that I discovered, but so so one of the summers of research, I did a lot of this research in Paris, but one of the summers I went to Grasse, which is in the south of France and is the sort of center of perfume. I remember like the first, like when we first got there, we like had lunch in this square, and there was like this really sort of like big prominent house, and then I went into the archives and was like looking for things, and I actually like looked in this, they had a big sort of map of where everybody used to live, and like this perfumer actually had lived in like that prominent house like right on the square that I had noticed before. So yeah, I guess the fun of sort of like uncovering, you know, this sort of the life of someone who was
real people.
Yeah, these were real people, and they were like you know, their lives are interwoven with the culture of France.
That's such a perfect ending.
Well, thank you so much,
Theresa.